24 hours inside the world's most secure prison, inside ADX Florence. It's known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, a place so secure that even the most dangerous criminals, serial killers, terrorists, and mafia bosses, are kept locked away, buried in isolation. But what happens when even the highest security measures fail? What happens inside the walls of a prison where escape is nearly impossible, yet some of the world's most infamous criminals still manage to wreak havoc from their cells? Today, we're taking you inside ADX Florence, the world's most secure prison. For 24 hours, we'll reveal the hidden truths, the chilling systems, and the stories of the men who call this place home, but who might never see the light of day again. A fortress unlike any other. It's a cold, early morning in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, an isolated stretch of land in Colorado. If you drive past, you wouldn't know it's there. The prison is cleverly hidden in plain sight, surrounded by the vast, empty nothingness that is the high desert. This is ADX Florence, and it stands as one of the most secure institutions in the entire world. A fortress. Its reputation precedes it, not for its architectural beauty or grandeur, but for its sheer impenetrability. With walls that tower over 12 feet, razor wire that twists in menacing spirals, and armed guards in every corner, this facility was designed with one purpose: to keep its most dangerous inmates from ever seeing freedom again. But behind those walls, things aren't as simple as they seem. It's not just a prison, it's a testing ground for human resilience. The men locked away here aren't your average criminals. They're the worst of the worst, the ones who've terrorized entire nations, wreaked havoc on societies, and left scars that will never heal. And yet, in this place, they fight a different battle. The battle for their sanity. With 465 inmates housed here at any given time, ADX Florence is home to criminals who have been deemed so dangerous, so violent, that even general population prisons are too lenient for them. These are men who have brought chaos into the world, whether through terrorism, serial killings, or organized crime. Here, they're kept in complete isolation, locked away in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. At ADX, the walls aren't just built with steel, they're built with psychological precision. The cells, narrow and sterile, contain only the bare essentials: a bed, a small desk, a toilet. And the only thing separating one inmate from the next is a wall, with only a narrow slit through which they can see the outside world, or rather, the world that exists beyond the prison's cold, concrete barriers. It wasn't always like this. In fact, it wasn't even until the 1990s that ADX Florence became the go-to facility for America's most violent criminals. Originally opened in 1994, it was part of the federal government's attempt to manage an increasing number of inmates whose crimes were so horrific, their very presence in general prisons posed too great a risk. ADX Florence was supposed to be the ultimate solution. But the more you learn about this place, the more you realize that being locked in one of the most secure facilities in the world isn't just about keeping people behind bars. It's about the psychological warfare waged against each and every inmate here. From the moment they enter, inmates are stripped of their identity, literally and figuratively. They're given a new number, a designation that replaces their name. They're forced to wear the same drab gray uniforms, day after day, month after month, year after year. And in the rare moments when they're allowed out of their cells, they're shackled, handcuffed, and escorted by armed guards, always in total isolation. It's a prison built on the idea of containment, on the idea that freedom can be stripped away in a way that's more profound than just physical confinement. But how do you break a man when you take away everything? The human need for connection. The need for interaction. The need for purpose. Inside ADX Florence, even time seems to stand still. And for many of its inhabitants, this slow unraveling of the mind is just as cruel as any physical torture. But why does a facility like this exist? Why does the US government go to such extreme measures to incarcerate people who, in many cases, are already serving life sentences without parole? And what's the true cost, on the prisoners themselves, and on society? To answer those questions, we must understand the prison's brutal architecture, its operations, and the lives of the men who are subjected to this near-total confinement. The journey into ADX Florence begins not with a single man, but with the entire system that holds him captive. This is chapter 1 of our journey into ADX Florence, a place so extreme, that for some, it feels like being erased from existence itself. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the history of the prison, meet the inmates, and uncover what happens when a human mind is locked away, with little more than a concrete wall for company. The inmates of ADX, monsters or men? Inside ADX Florence, the concept of dangerous takes on a whole new meaning. The inmates here aren't your average criminals. These men are legends of violence and terror, some of the most notorious in the world. The crimes that landed them here are almost too horrific to comprehend. But what happens when these criminals are stripped of everything, beyond their freedom, beyond their family, beyond their ability to even see another human being face to face? As we step further into the heart of ADX Florence, it becomes clear that the place isn't just about incarceration, it's about containment. But the question arises, what is more dangerous? The men who are locked away inside, or the system that created them? Let's start with Terry Nichols, the second man convicted in the Oklahoma City bombing, one of the deadliest terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. In 1995, Nichols and Timothy McVeigh orchestrated the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, killing 168 people and injuring over 600. The sheer scale of the destruction was unimaginable. McVeigh was executed in 2001, but Nichols, who helped him carry out the attack, was sentenced to life without parole and shipped off to ADX Florence in 2005. Inside the walls of this prison, Nichols is isolated, cut off from the world, only allowed the most minimal human interaction. But Terry Nichols isn't the only one who resides here. Robert Hansen, a former FBI agent turned Russian spy, is also among ADX's infamous residents. For years, Hansen betrayed his country, passing highly classified information to the Soviet Union and later Russia. His actions led to the deaths of multiple American operatives. He was arrested in 2001, and his betrayal sent shockwaves through the FBI and U.S. intelligence agencies. Hansen's case is an unsettling reminder of just how deeply someone can infiltrate the system they were once sworn to protect. Today, he lives in solitary confinement at ADX Florence, completely cut off from the outside world. Then, there's Richard Reed, also known as the shoe bomber. In 2001, Reed attempted to detonate explosives hidden in his shoes aboard American Airlines Flight 63. His plan failed, but not before he sent shockwaves across the world, forever changing air travel security. Reed was convicted of attempting to murder 197 people and was sentenced to life imprisonment. He now spends his days in ADX Florence, isolated from other inmates, with only his own thoughts for company. And we cannot overlook James Whitey Bulger, the infamous Boston gangster who terrorized the city for decades. Bulger was one of the most notorious mobsters in the history of organized crime, running a brutal empire under the guise of an FBI informant. He was captured in 2011 after 16 years on the run. But by the time he arrived at ADX Florence in 2018, Bulger was an old man, his once dominant gang network dismantled, his influence shattered. The cold, hard truth of his time inside ADX was that it stripped him of his power, forcing him to face the reality of his crimes. These are the men whose names resonate in the darkest corners of crime history. They represent the very extremes of human behavior, men capable of mass destruction, espionage, and terror. Yet, they are also products of a system that sometimes seems more focused on ensuring their complete isolation than on understanding what turned them into the monsters they became. As we dig deeper into their lives, we begin to ask, are they truly monsters, or are they men who have been broken by a system that seeks to erase them? Life in ADX Florence is a psychological test. The men here are often given no more than the barest essentials, a small cell, a bed, a toilet, and a small window with a view of nothing but sky. They live in an almost invisible state of being, separated from the outside world. They cannot hear the voices of their loved ones, see the faces of their children, or experience human touch. There is no freedom to talk to another soul or to make their own choices. The psychological toll is immense. This isolation forces many inmates to confront their own demons. Some fall deeper into madness, while others struggle to retain some semblance of their humanity. Over time, the silence in ADX Florence has a way of taking its toll on even the most hardened criminals. And so, the question becomes, what happens to a man when he is removed from society to this extent? When every human interaction is controlled, and the only conversations are with the walls around him? For some of the men inside ADX Florence, the process of being stripped of everything they once had, power, control, influence, can lead to complete psychological collapse. Others become more dangerous. They turn inward, their isolation feeding into their rage. But the question remains, does this brutal system of containment make them more dangerous, or does it simply break them beyond recognition? In ADX Florence, it's not just the inmates who are trapped, it's the entire system that has built this fortress of isolation. The guards, the wardens, even the entire prison infrastructure, are part of a system that constantly battles against the idea that some criminals can ever truly be contained, especially in a world that still carries the ghosts of their crimes. As we take a closer look at these men and the prison that holds them, we uncover more than just their crimes. We begin to explore the deeper truths behind ADX Florence itself, the hidden world within its walls, where no one truly escapes. And we ask ourselves, what is the true cost of a life lived in absolute isolation? Stay with us, as we uncover the psychological cost, the toll on the human spirit, and the consequences of locking away the world's most dangerous criminals in a place where no one can hear their screams. The hidden power behind the walls. Inside ADX Florence, the structure of the prison is more than just about containment, it's about control. But there's one crucial aspect of the prison system that is often overlooked, the power dynamics that exist within the walls, even in a facility where inmates are kept in near total isolation. In this chapter, we'll explore not just the men in ADX Florence, but also the unseen forces that govern how this prison operates, and the terrifying influence some of its residents can still exert, even from behind bars. At first glance, the prison seems like a well-oiled machine, built for absolute security. Inmates spend 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, the remaining hour being used for minimal exercise in a small, enclosed yard. These conditions are meant to keep them in check, to prevent any form of communication or interaction that might lead to dangerous activities. But the reality is far more complex. In ADX Florence, control is not just limited to the walls. The influence of gang leaders, mobsters, and terrorists continues to permeate the corridors of the prison, making it one of the most dangerous institutions in the world. Gang leaders behind bars. Take, for instance, Mexican mafia members housed in ADX Florence. Despite being incarcerated and separated from their gangs, these individuals retain immense power in the outside world, orchestrating illegal operations from their cells. Their contacts on the outside allow them to maintain a grip on the illegal trade of drugs, weapons, and more, which flows through the prison system. Even when physically cut off from the streets, their influence doesn't end, it only shifts. Prison gangs, such as the Aryan Brotherhood, continue to exert control over the entire facility, even though members are isolated in different parts of the prison. These gangs operate on a silent, almost unseen network that goes beyond the prison walls. Communication is often covert, messages sent through family members, bribed guards, or even through the prison's internal systems. The influence of these gangs doesn't just end with the inmates. It seeps through to the prison guards and staff, many of whom have been caught smuggling contraband, facilitating communication between inmates and the outside world. Some guards, whether through fear or greed, become part of the system that keeps the gangs alive, even within the most secure facilities in the nation. ADX Florence, with its supermax status, was intended to prevent this kind of influence. But it's not foolproof. In a facility where the most notorious criminals in the world are housed, there are still ways to exploit weaknesses in the system. For example, smuggling. It's known that despite ADX Florence's best efforts, illicit materials still manage to make their way in, drugs, cell phones, and even weapons. This is the hidden world behind the walls of this prison. The guards might think they have complete control, but in reality, some of the most dangerous criminals still pull the strings. The prison within a prison. Even within the confines of solitary confinement, some of the most notorious inmates continue to wield power. Take, for example, Rodrigo Garcia, a known associate of the Sinaloa cartel, who was sent to ADX Florence after being arrested in the largest drug bust in U.S. history. Despite being incarcerated, Garcia was still able to send orders from inside his cell. Guards report that when his name is mentioned in the prison, there's an immediate change in behavior among inmates and staff, something shifts in the air. His power didn't end with his capture, it merely adapted to the prison environment. He still controls parts of the operation, directing the flow of illegal substances, and continuing his criminal empire even while locked in solitary. But not all inmates use their influence to further criminal activity. Some prisoners, like John Walker Lind, the so-called American Taliban, were locked up in ADX Florence after being convicted of supporting terrorism. Even here, inside a prison designed to isolate, Lind managed to communicate with others, his name becoming a symbol of extremist ideologies, even in the confines of the prison. Despite efforts to keep him isolated, Lind's influence still reached the outside world, proving just how difficult it is to keep a dangerous mind completely contained. This hidden power behind the walls of ADX Florence is what makes it such a unique and terrifying place. It's not just the physical structure that keeps inmates contained, it's the psychological warfare at play. The gang leaders, the terrorists, the mobsters, they don't need to be physically present to control the chaos. They only need to plant the seeds and allow their influence to grow, silently but powerfully. The reality of powerlessness. But even as these criminals retain their power, the guards of ADX Florence face a different set of challenges. They are the ones who live in constant tension, the ones who must navigate the thin line between maintaining security and being manipulated by the very people they are sworn to keep in check. It's not an easy job. Many guards at ADX Florence live with the fear of being manipulated by the inmates. Bribery, threats, and even coercion are part of their daily lives. They know that every time they open an inmate's door, they might be faced with a moment of tension, a moment where everything could go wrong. Some of the guards are themselves a part of the system, giving in to threats or bribes from the gangs that operate even in the shadows. In some cases, these guards have been caught smuggling contraband, allowing drugs or communication devices to enter the prison and further cement the gang's control. This battle for control is constant, inside the prison, between inmates and guards, and outside the prison, where gang leaders and criminal organizations continue to operate, pulling the strings from afar. ADX Florence is not just a place of isolation, it's a war zone where power, influence, and fear dominate the daily life of its inhabitants. The violence and tension here are not always visible, they don't come in the form of open riots or prison brawls. Instead, they come through subtle manipulation, the kind that's hard to trace but leaves deep scars in its wake. It's the silent power that runs through every hallway and every cell, affecting every inmate, every guard, and every operation within the facility. In the next chapter, we will look deeper into life inside ADX Florence. The day-to-day existence of those confined within these walls, and the extreme toll this level of isolation takes on the human mind. What happens when a man is forced to live in complete silence, with no human contact, no stimulation, and no sense of time? Stay with us as we reveal the psychological horrors of ADX Florence. The toll of solitary confinement. The psychological cost of imprisonment in ADX Florence isn't just about the physical confinement behind steel bars. It's about what happens when time and human connection are stripped away, when an inmate's world is reduced to nothing but the four walls of their cell, the constant buzz of fluorescent lights, and the isolation that never ends. The concept of solitary confinement isn't new. It's been used in prisons for centuries, with varying degrees of severity. But what makes ADX Florence unique is the degree to which isolation is taken to the extreme. Here, inmates are subjected to 23 hours of isolation per day. They're allowed out of their cells for just 1 hour a day, but even that is spent in a small exercise yard with high walls and a solid ceiling, surrounded by guards and cameras. For those who have been inside for years, even decades, it feels like a prison within a prison. This extreme form of confinement can break even the most hardened criminals. It's not the physical conditions that make ADX Florence so dangerous. It's the mental strain, the psychological toll that begins the moment an inmate enters this facility. And it's a toll that no amount of steel or stone can shield against. The breakdown of the mind. When an inmate first arrives at ADX Florence, they're subjected to a step-down program. Initially, they are placed in high-security isolation, where they can't interact with other prisoners. Over time, some are given more privileges, like a few more hours in the yard or limited access to books and television. But the vast majority remain in total isolation for years, sometimes decades. The psychological consequences of such isolation are devastating. Deprivation of social interaction is one of the most powerful forms of psychological torture. Human beings are social creatures. We thrive on connection, even if that connection is as simple as a smile from a stranger or a casual conversation with a fellow inmate. Inmates begin to lose track of time. Their days blur together, becoming a haze of monotony. Their internal clocks break down. Studies have shown that long-term solitary confinement can lead to severe psychological effects, including hallucinations, paranoia, and violent outbursts. Some inmates in ADX Florence report hearing voices, seeing figures in their cells, or experiencing vivid, often terrifying, dreams. The mind begins to fragment. Inmates may speak to themselves, engage in repetitive behavior, or even develop obsessive thoughts. The stress of isolation exacerbates any underlying mental health issues, causing previously manageable conditions to spiral out of control. And for many of the men housed here, men like Terry Nichols and Robert Hansen, who have been in solitary confinement for decades, the sense of being cut off from reality becomes unbearable. But the question arises, does this kind of confinement punish the criminal, or does it simply break the human being entirely? And what happens to a man who has been broken? The case of Robert Hansen, a mastermind in isolation. Robert Hansen was a man who had once been a top FBI agent, trusted by the U.S. government with some of its most classified secrets. His betrayal of the country sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. His decision to spy for the Soviet Union and later Russia led to the deaths of many American operatives. And yet, despite the depth of his treachery, his time in ADX Florence is one of complete isolation. Hansen was sent to ADX Florence in 2002, after being convicted of espionage. From the moment he arrived, he was placed in a special unit, a solitary confinement unit designed for high-profile prisoners like him. His life in ADX Florence is one of total sensory deprivation. No conversations with fellow inmates. No handshakes, no human touch. His world is reduced to four walls and the distant hum of prison life. He is allowed minimal interaction with his attorneys, but even that is limited. For a man who spent most of his life in positions of power, constantly interacting with others and making critical decisions, the isolation is a form of mental torture. Robert Hansen, the brilliant but deeply flawed man who once held a prominent position in the FBI, now spends his days in silence, surrounded only by his thoughts. His mind, once a well-oiled machine of espionage and manipulation, now has only his memories and regrets for company. Hansen's case is unique, but it's not an isolated one. There are countless inmates at ADX Florence who face a similar fate. These are men who, like Hansen, were once in control, men who thrived on power and human connection. Now, they face a daily struggle for mental survival. And in ADX Florence, the question is not just whether or not they can survive, it's whether they can remain human. The forgotten men of ADX Florence. There are those who enter ADX Florence and never leave. Some of the most dangerous inmates in the facility are serving life sentences without the possibility of parole. For these men, their time in ADX Florence is not a temporary punishment, it is their existence for the rest of their lives. And for them, the isolation becomes their identity. Take, for example, Thomas Silverstein, who was sentenced to life for the murder of a prison guard in 1983. He spent over 30 years in solitary confinement at ADX Florence. His case has become a symbol of the extreme measures the U.S. government is willing to take to protect society from the most dangerous individuals. Silverstein's story isn't just one of crime, it's a tale of the long-term psychological consequences of solitary confinement. For men like Silverstein, the prison becomes their world. They live within a carefully controlled system, where everything is monitored and restricted. Their meals are served in their cells. Their activities are limited. They cannot see other prisoners, and they rarely speak to anyone. The outside world is nothing more than a memory, a distant place they may never return to. But while these men may never leave, they still live, though what they've become is often far removed from the person they were when they entered the system. In ADX Florence, the past and future are irrelevant. The present is what matters, and for these inmates, the present is a never-ending cycle of isolation and despair. The human cost of isolation. What happens to a man when he is removed from society in such an extreme manner? Does he retain his humanity, or does the isolation consume him entirely? Solitary confinement, in its most extreme form, has a way of stripping a person down to their very core, forcing them to confront not just their actions, but the deepest parts of their psyche. Some survive this isolation. They endure, finding ways to cope, whether it's through reading, writing, or meditating. But for many, solitary confinement is not just a punishment, it's a process of dehumanization. The very thing that was meant to break them becomes the thing that destroys them. And in ADX Florence, this process happens every single day. In the next chapter, we will examine the minds of those who survive this torment. We'll take a closer look at the stories of the men who have lived in ADX Florence for decades, how they've managed to hold on to their sense of self, and how the prison itself has become a part of them. Stay with us as we explore the psychological resilience that keeps these men from completely succumbing to the crushing weight of isolation. Surviving ADX, the psychology of isolation. To understand what life inside ADX Florence really does to a person, we need to take a deeper look at the psychological toll that 23 hours a day in solitary confinement has on the human mind. What happens when a person's entire world is reduced to nothing but a small concrete cell? When all of their sensory input comes from the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant sound of guards patrolling the corridors, and the occasional tray of food slid through a slot in the door. This isn't just a matter of passing time. It's about how the mind bends, warps, and sometimes breaks under the weight of isolation. The inmates at ADX Florence, subjected to this form of extreme confinement, face more than just a loss of freedom, they face a battle against their own mind. The breakdown of the human psyche. Isolation, when it's taken to the extreme, can begin to deprive the mind of its sense of self. In normal life, we receive constant stimuli, the sight of a loved one's face, the sound of a friend's voice, the feeling of a handshake or a hug. These interactions, no matter how small, keep us grounded. They tell us who we are and where we stand in the world. But in solitary confinement, all of that is gone. There are no interactions, no contact, no social cues. The inmate becomes disconnected, not just from the outside world, but from themselves. Time loses meaning. Days blend together. Without the ability to mark time through external events, birthdays, holidays, personal milestones, the person begins to lose a sense of reality. Hours stretch into an infinite loop of monotony and stillness. The mental toll is profound. Hallucinations become common. Some inmates report hearing voices, others claim to see figures that aren't there. A report from the American Psychological Association found that long-term solitary confinement can lead to severe anxiety, depression, and psychosis. Prisoners often begin to lose touch with reality, creating a permanent mental scar. Inmates at ADX Florence, who are already dangerous men who have committed heinous acts, are now subject to a punishment that is designed not just to punish, but to break them down in the most insidious way possible, through mental and emotional torture. Inmates who have survived ADX Florence's isolation. Among the men who have lived in ADX Florence, a few have become symbols of survival. These are the inmates who, despite the odds, manage to maintain some semblance of their mental health. How have they done it? What makes them different from the others? And more importantly, what does survival mean in a place designed to strip everything from you, your freedom, your identity, and, in many cases, your humanity? Let's take the example of Thomas Silverstein, a name that has become synonymous with solitary confinement in the U.S. prison system. Silverstein was convicted of the 1983 murder of a prison guard at the Atlanta penitentiary. His violent actions placed him in ADX Florence, where he would remain in solitary confinement for more than 3 decades. The fact that he survived this extreme isolation speaks volumes about the human capacity for resilience. But how did he do it? For Silverstein, survival meant creating a mental framework. A system of routine that helped him cope with the crushing isolation. In an interview later in life, he admitted that he relied heavily on mental discipline, reading, writing, and deep reflection. His survival wasn't about resisting the system, it was about finding ways to endure the psychological warfare being waged against him. But even the strongest minds can only endure so much. Silverstein, like many others in ADX Florence, was broken, mentally and emotionally. Despite his attempts to maintain some degree of sanity, the effects of living in isolation for so long were undeniable. His later years in ADX were marked by depression, paranoia, and a growing sense of detachment from reality. The role of routine in surviving isolation. For inmates in ADX Florence, routine is everything. It's the only way to maintain some sense of normalcy in a world designed to keep them unmoored. Each day is the same: wake up, eat, exercise, and repeat. The absence of external stimuli means that internal structure becomes the key to survival. Exercise, even in its limited form, is a crucial part of maintaining mental and physical health. In ADX Florence, inmates are allowed 1 hour of recreation each day, which takes place in an enclosed yard where they are allowed to walk or jog. But even this time is fraught with tension. The inmates are watched by guards, and the yard is surrounded by high walls, preventing any meaningful interaction with others. Despite this, many prisoners rely on this solitary hour to clear their minds, even if just for a moment. Similarly, reading is another vital part of daily life for ADX inmates. Books become a lifeline, a way to escape the confines of their cells, if only in their minds. But the selection of books is often highly restricted. Inmates can request books from a limited library, and violent or political materials are usually banned. Still, for those who manage to find something to dive into, it offers a brief respite from the chaos of their isolation. In some cases, writing letters becomes a crucial form of connection. Some inmates at ADX Florence have been known to write to family members, while others engage in correspondence with pen pals, seeking human connection in a place where it is in short supply. But these letters are often screened by the prison staff, and many inmates find that their communication is limited to brief, sanitized exchanges. The struggle for sanity. As the days drag on, the mind becomes the ultimate battleground. In ADX Florence, inmates are not just fighting for survival, they're fighting to keep their sanity intact. Mental health issues like anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts become commonplace. Many men who have spent years in solitary confinement experience intense feelings of hopelessness and despair. The absence of human contact, coupled with the psychological toll of isolation, can make it feel like there is no way out, no way to ever return to the world outside. Some of the most heartbreaking cases involve men who lose their sense of identity. For these inmates, the line between self and prison blurs. The solitary confinement becomes so all-encompassing that they no longer know who they are beyond the walls of ADX Florence. And when you strip a man of everything, his family, his community, his future, what's left? This is the true horror of ADX Florence. It's not just about keeping dangerous men locked away, it's about destroying the very essence of what it means to be human. The toll that this prison takes on the mind is nothing short of devastating, and for many of its residents, the price of survival is their very humanity. In the next chapter, we'll explore the stories of the men who have spent decades in this facility. We'll see how they've survived, if they have at all, and what they've become in the process. Stay with us as we continue to peel back the layers of ADX Florence, revealing the darkness that lies within. Years in solitary, the cost of survival. Time is a merciless force behind the walls of ADX Florence. For those who have spent years, even decades within its confines, time no longer flows as it does in the outside world. It's suspended, warped, endless, stretching into a void where the only certainty is isolation. No clock marks the passing hours, no days distinguish one from the next. There is only the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the oppressive silence that echoes throughout the facility. For the men who live in this eternal present, the psychological toll is immense. But what happens when human resilience is tested beyond its breaking point? What does a man become when he spends decades isolated, with only his thoughts for company? The stories of these men, those who have lived in ADX Florence for years, are haunting. They reveal not just the brutality of the prison, but the dark undercurrents of human survival. And as we dig deeper into their experiences, we find that, for many, the battle isn't just against the prison or the guards, it's against themselves. The ghosts of prisoners past. Take the story of Thomas Silverstein, one of the most notorious men ever to be housed in ADX Florence. Convicted of murder after killing a prison guard, Silverstein was sent to ADX Florence in the early 1990s. But his isolation didn't begin there. He had already spent years in solitary confinement in other facilities, enduring the psychological strain of being cut off from the outside world. What makes Silverstein's case so tragic isn't just the crimes he committed, it's the way he was consumed by the very system designed to break him. His time at ADX Florence was marked by complete isolation, an existence where the only contact he had with the outside world was through brief visits from attorneys or the rare letter from a family member. As the years stretched on, Silverstein began to lose touch with reality. His mind fractured, and the monotony of prison life became more than just a punishment. It became a form of mental torment. He spent over 3 decades in solitary confinement, a man stripped of his identity and left to wither away in a small cell. For him, the boundary between reality and the hellish existence inside ADX began to blur. His story is one of survival, a survival that came at the cost of his mind. Silverstein became a symbol of the long-term damage caused by solitary confinement. He was never the same man after his years in isolation. And his story is just one among many. There are countless others like him, men who were once sharp, calculated, and capable, but who were irreversibly changed by the brutality of ADX Florence. Life after ADX Florence, the shattered minds. But what happens to these men when they leave ADX Florence? In theory, prisoners who serve their time in supermax facilities like ADX Florence are supposed to be reintegrated into society once they've served their sentences. But for many of the men who have spent decades in solitary confinement, the damage is irreversible. Robert Hansen, the former FBI agent who betrayed his country and sold secrets to Russia, spent several years in ADX Florence after his conviction. Though he didn't spend as long in solitary as some, his time in ADX still had a profound impact on him. Hansen's eventual release to a lesser security facility revealed how hard it was for him to adjust to the outside world. The long periods of isolation left him with an inability to relate to others, even those closest to him. For Hansen, leaving ADX Florence didn't mean escaping the consequences of the years he had spent in isolation. It meant entering a world that was now foreign to him, a world in which he couldn't function like he once had. His mind had been twisted by the isolation, and the adjustments to everyday life were nearly impossible. Hansen, like many others, was left to grapple with the psychological wreckage caused by his years in one of the most secure prisons in the world. Some of the men who have spent decades at ADX Florence leave the facility, but few can ever truly leave behind the scars of their confinement. The human mind wasn't designed to survive this kind of punishment. And yet, here they are, men who have been pushed to the edge of insanity, struggling to find their place in a world that seems almost beyond reach. The real prison, the battle within. While ADX Florence's walls are designed to contain the bodies of its inhabitants, the real prison is in their minds. For the men who live here, there is no escape. There is no release. The physical walls may be solid, unyielding, but the mental walls are just as thick, and they never come down. The men inside ADX Florence are stripped of their humanity. For the inmates here, life is not about rehabilitation or redemption, it's about survival. But survival comes at a steep price. The longer they are kept in isolation, the more they lose themselves. They become ghosts, shadows of the men they once were, reduced to nothing but their own memories and regrets. One former inmate, who spent over 10 years in solitary confinement at ADX Florence, describes it like this: it's like being erased. Not just from society, but from your own life. You forget who you are. You forget what it feels like to be human. His words are a chilling reflection of the experience of so many men who have passed through ADX Florence's gates. The psychological impact on the prison staff. But the mental toll of ADX Florence doesn't only affect the inmates. The guards and prison staff who work inside also bear a significant burden. They are the ones who witness the slow unraveling of these men's minds. They are the ones who see the psychotic breaks, the fits of rage, the attempts at self-harm. But they are also the ones who must maintain control over a facility that's designed to keep its inhabitants completely isolated. Many guards who have worked at ADX Florence report feeling a profound sense of alienation and helplessness. They are trained to maintain order, but they're not trained to deal with the psychological effects of the kind of isolation they're forcing upon the prisoners. They live with the knowledge that the men in their care are being broken by the very system they've sworn to uphold. And that weight is hard to carry. Some guards, after spending years working in ADX Florence, have quit their jobs due to the mental strain it puts on them. The prison system, it seems, doesn't just break the inmates, it also chips away at the souls of those who must enforce its rules. The consequences of isolation, a never-ending cycle. So, what is the cost of ADX Florence's methods? Is it enough to protect society from the world's most dangerous criminals? Or does it simply create a cycle of destruction, where the men inside are broken beyond repair, and the guards who enforce the system are left with scars of their own? In the next chapter, we'll explore the future of ADX Florence. Is this kind of isolation even ethical? Is there a better way to handle the world's most dangerous prisoners? Stay with us as we examine the deeper questions about the prison system, and what ADX Florence means for the men who live inside and the society they were once a part of. The future of ADX Florence, ethics and reform. The story of ADX Florence is one of uncompromising isolation, extreme security, and psychological torment. But as the years go on, questions begin to arise, not just about the effectiveness of ADX Florence as a prison, but about its moral and ethical implications. What kind of justice is served by locking a man away in a cell for 23 hours a day, cutting him off from all human contact for years, and slowly unraveling his mind? As the prison system comes under increasing scrutiny in the United States, many are asking, is this level of isolation necessary? Is it ethical to subject human beings to this kind of prolonged torment in the name of punishment or safety? And is there a better way to deal with the world's most dangerous criminals, one that doesn't come at the expense of their mental and emotional well-being? The ethical debate, punishment or torture. In 2011, the United Nations condemned the use of prolonged solitary confinement as a form of torture, calling it a violation of human rights. According to the UN, isolation beyond 15 days can cause severe psychological damage, including depression, anxiety, and psychosis. These findings have led to growing calls for prison reform in the U.S., especially concerning supermax prisons like ADX Florence, where inmates can spend decades in solitary confinement with little to no contact with the outside world. ADX Florence, despite its reputation as the most secure prison in the world, has come under increasing fire from human rights advocates and mental health professionals. The very methods that were designed to protect society and prevent escape may, in fact, be destroying the inmates inside. Isolation isn't just a tool of control, it's a form of psychological warfare that can leave irreversible scars on the human mind. One of the most disturbing realities about ADX Florence is that its inmates are, in many cases, already serving life sentences. They will never be released. So why subject them to the extreme isolation of supermax confinement? Is this really about keeping dangerous people off the streets, or is it about inflicting a form of punishment that borders on cruelty? Experts argue that the prison's sole purpose should be to punish, not to destroy a person's sanity. But when a man is locked away for decades, completely cut off from human interaction and left to slowly deteriorate mentally, is the line between punishment and torture not crossed? The call for reform, a new path forward. Over the past decade, voices calling for prison reform have grown louder, not just in the United States, but across the globe. The movement has reached the highest levels of government and law enforcement, as people begin to question the effectiveness and morality of supermax prisons like ADX Florence. While there's no easy answer to the question of how to deal with the most dangerous criminals in society, there is a growing consensus that isolating them for decades is not the solution. Advocates for prison reform suggest that rehabilitation, rather than extreme isolation, should be the focus. Some even argue that programs aimed at reintegrating prisoners into society, even those serving life sentences, should be implemented. This isn't to say that the threat of violence from inmates isn't real. The need to keep dangerous criminals locked away from the general population is still critical. But the inhumane treatment of these individuals, subjecting them to solitary confinement for years on end, can lead to a life that is marked by broken minds, fractured identities, and irreparable harm. There has to be a middle ground, a balance between ensuring safety and protecting the mental health of inmates. In a way, this debate over solitary confinement mirrors the struggle of the men imprisoned inside ADX Florence. The system is designed to isolate and control, but it also has the potential to create monsters, both within the prison walls and in the minds of the prisoners themselves. Potential alternatives to solitary confinement. So what does the future of ADX Florence look like? Could it be reformed to address the growing concerns about human rights and psychological damage? Experts say that there are alternatives to solitary confinement, methods of incarceration that focus on maintaining safety while also ensuring that prisoners don't lose their humanity. One potential solution is the implementation of therapeutic programs within supermax facilities, where inmates can receive mental health treatment and engage in structured, positive activities. Programs that allow inmates to interact with others, either through monitored communication or group therapy, could help combat the mental deterioration caused by isolation. Another option is the use of more advanced technology to monitor inmates while still allowing them to engage with each other. Virtual visitation, for example, could allow family members and friends to communicate with inmates without compromising security. In fact, some prisons across the United States have already begun implementing this technology to improve the mental well-being of inmates. Of course, these reforms come with their own challenges, especially in a facility like ADX Florence, where the most dangerous criminals are kept under lock and key. But the question remains, can we continue to justify the suffering of those incarcerated in supermax prisons under the belief that it is necessary for public safety? Or is there a better way to handle these men, one that doesn't come at the expense of their mental health and basic human dignity? The future of ADX Florence. For ADX Florence, the future is uncertain. The prison is considered one of the most secure in the world, but security isn't the only concern anymore. As the conversation about prison reform gains momentum, ADX Florence's methods are being put to the test. Will it remain the final destination for America's most dangerous criminals, where isolation and control are the only answers? Or will the future bring a shift toward more humane alternatives, where the focus is on rehabilitation and preserving the mental health of those incarcerated? Ultimately, ADX Florence represents a critical juncture in the American prison system. It's a reminder of the delicate balance between justice and punishment, and of the cost that can come with trying to lock away the most dangerous minds in the world. The men who live inside its walls are not just inmates, they are the human faces of a system that must confront its own ethics, its own morality, and the very meaning of punishment in the 21st century. Conclusion: a story without an easy answer. As we reflect on the reality of life inside ADX Florence, we are left with more questions than answers. How do we balance the need for safety with the need for humanity? Is it possible to contain the world's most dangerous criminals without breaking their minds in the process? And what role does mental health play in the equation of justice? ADX Florence is a place where the line between punishment and torture is constantly in question. And as the conversation around prison reform continues, it's a question that demands an answer, a question that will shape the future of the American justice system for years to come. That concludes our story of ADX Florence. This 24-hour journey inside the world's most secure prison has shown us not just the physical barriers that keep its inhabitants locked away, but the profound psychological walls that come with the kind of isolation it imposes. For those within, survival means more than just staying alive, it means holding on to a sense of self, even as everything around them is designed to strip it away. The human cost of ADX Florence and the search for justice. As we draw the final curtain on this journey inside ADX Florence, we're left with more than just the stories of the inmates who live behind those walls. What we uncover here is the larger question of how we, as a society, deal with our most dangerous citizens. ADX Florence is not just a prison, it is a reflection of our collective values, our justice system, and our beliefs about punishment and human dignity. You see, ADX Florence wasn't always meant to be the final resting place for men who have committed heinous acts. It wasn't just designed to lock away the worst criminals, it was created to contain them, to ensure that they couldn't harm anyone again. But over the years, it has become something more than just a prison. It has become a symbol of what happens when a society decides that punishment should be the only answer to crime. But punishment is a complicated concept. How far can we go? How much suffering is too much? In a world where crime is often rooted in deep systemic issues, can we really justify subjecting human beings to this level of suffering in the name of justice? What does it mean when we punish someone not only for their crime, but for who they are, for what they've done, and for what they've become in the eyes of the law? The men housed in ADX Florence are not just criminals, they are men who have been subjected to a system that intentionally isolates and breaks them down. The psychological effects of such isolation are well documented, and they're not just statistics or case studies. These are real people, men who had lives before their incarceration, who had families, dreams, and aspirations. And yet, for many of them, these things have been stripped away, buried beneath layers of concrete, steel, and silence. But when we talk about the human cost of a prison like ADX Florence, it's not just about the inmates. It's also about the people on the outside, the families, the communities, the entire system that sends people to such places. We must ask ourselves, what does it mean for a society to condone such extreme measures of control? What kind of world are we building when we decide that total isolation is the answer to crime? Is it a world that values justice, or is it a world that values retribution at any cost? For those who are incarcerated in supermax prisons like ADX Florence, there is no return. There is no chance for redemption or reintegration into society. They are cut off from everything that could allow them to heal, to grow, or to make amends. The constant hum of isolation surrounds them, drowning out everything but their thoughts, their regrets, and their pain. And yet, what we rarely talk about is how this process of dehumanization affects not just the inmates, but the entire criminal justice system itself. For when we reduce a man to nothing more than a number, when we lock him away and throw away the key, we begin to lose our own humanity as well. It's easy to look at the men inside ADX Florence and say they deserve it. After all, they have committed terrible crimes. They are responsible for untold suffering and destruction. But is that enough to justify the treatment they receive? Is it right to take a man who has already paid for his crimes with decades of isolation and push him to the brink of insanity? Is that punishment, or is it simply an act of cruelty disguised as justice? The question of whether solitary confinement, especially the extreme form practiced at ADX Florence, is ever truly ethical is something that is not easily answered. Prison reform advocates argue that the current system, which keeps people in solitary confinement for extended periods of time, is not just ineffective, it is damaging in ways that cannot be repaired. Studies have shown that prolonged isolation can cause lasting mental health problems, conditions like anxiety, depression, paranoia, and psychosis. Some studies suggest that solitary confinement has a greater psychological impact than physical torture, and the long-term effects of such treatment can be devastating. The fact that solitary confinement is still used, despite all of these findings, reveals just how deeply ingrained our beliefs about punishment really are. The system was never designed to be humane, it was designed to be efficient. It was designed to control, to contain, and to protect society from those who pose the greatest threat. But at what cost? As we watch the men inside ADX Florence fade into the walls of their cells, their identities lost to time and isolation, we are forced to confront an uncomfortable reality: we are not just punishing criminals, we are punishing humanity itself. When we decide that the cost of justice is the complete breakdown of an individual's mental and emotional state, we start to lose sight of what justice is supposed to be. Justice is not just about punishment. It's about accountability, but it's also about rehabilitation, and it's about the belief that every human being, even the most dangerous, deserves a chance to redeem themselves. As we sit here, reflecting on the legacy of ADX Florence, we are reminded that the prison system is not just about holding criminals accountable for their actions, it's about holding society accountable for its own values. We have to ask ourselves, do we truly believe in justice? Do we believe that a person's worth can be measured by the worst thing they've ever done? Or do we believe that, even in the face of unspeakable crimes, there is still humanity left to save? The road ahead, will we choose reform? As we move forward, there's a growing call for reform in the U.S. prison system. Politicians, activists, and mental health experts are speaking out, advocating for an overhaul of solitary confinement practices, and pushing for a justice system that focuses on rehabilitation rather than punishment. The goal is not just to lock away the most dangerous criminals, but to help them find their way back into society, if not as free men, then as individuals who can contribute to society in some meaningful way, even from behind bars. The debate continues, but the time for change is now. ADX Florence and its methods have been the subject of intense scrutiny in recent years. As we look ahead, the question remains: can we continue to justify a system that seeks to break people down rather than rehabilitate them? Can we continue to isolate those who have already been cut off from society, leaving them to rot in their cells? Or will we choose to build a more humane system, one that focuses on rehabilitation, understanding, and, most importantly, human dignity? The men inside ADX Florence are not just prisoners, they are symbols of a broken system, one that we have the power to change. But for that to happen, we must all ask ourselves, what kind of society do we want to be? Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of ADX Florence. We hope this documentary has not only shed light on the harsh realities of the U.S. prison system, but also opened up a larger conversation about justice, reform, and humanity. As we move forward, we can only hope that the conversations sparked here lead to meaningful change, because, in the end, the way we treat our most dangerous individuals reflects the values we hold as a society. Stay tuned for future investigations and thought-provoking documentaries on the criminal justice system.